Hi, everybody. Last week, Nancy Lombardo gave us a big dose of compassion, but some people want more. So we're going to have compassion again tonight. Nancy pointed out that compassion is not just a feeling, but includes an inclination to act. The word compassion is actually a church Latin translation directly from Greek. The word sympathy, meaning suffering with or feeling with, compassion, sympathy, same thing, with suffering, feeling with or suffering with somebody else. But we tend to use the word compassion now to mean sympathy plus healing. The word empathy, connecting to somebody else's feelings, is similar, but sometimes it has a problematic connotation, or you don't want to have too much compassion, could be a problem. Medical doctors and therapists have to decide where to draw a boundary with their patients and maintain some distance. You don't want to get in bed with your patients, figuratively or literally. I could never be a doctor because I would just pass out. In fact, I did pass out watching a childbirth film when I was in a childbirth class, and I was sitting next to another expectant father, and there on the screen was a woman having a real hard time with her birth experience, and I lost it. So that it was as if I was in a phone booth and somebody was throwing splotches of paint on the window until gradually my field of vision disappeared entirely. I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't feel where I was, and I couldn't talk. I couldn't say, "Larry, I think I'm passing out." The only thing I had was I knew I was still upright. I hadn't toppled over. Then gradually all of this reversed itself and the paint came off the window and everything, and I had all my senses back. That's a pathological level of empathy. I don't think I should be delivering babies, do you? Now, Elon Musk says that he doesn't like to empathize with his workers at Tesla because they have a job to do. In sociology, we say there are two kinds of leadership. There's the task-oriented leadership that Musk is talking about, focusing on getting things done. But there's also socio-emotional leadership, keeping people happy in the group. And you need both, a balance. And how much you have of either one depends on the kind of group that you're in. Why should people, and other animals in fact, be compassionate? Scientific studies indicate that compassion is a basic genetic impulse in rats, dogs, chimpanzees, and human animals. It has survival value, starting with the need for parents to be compassionate with their babies, for example. In laboratory studies, people's first inclination is to show compassion, but they will curb their compassion if they think other people will think they're doing it for self-interest, which is kind of ironic. Both men and women regard kindness as a highly valued trait in other people. So you can see that would have survival value for picking mates that are compassionate. In the book, The Art of Happiness, the Dalai Lama says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. I like to say, sort of devilishly, I like to say, the most selfish thing you can do for yourself is to help other people, which brings up the debate about whether there's really any such thing as altruism, which we don't have time for. Remember the police recruits that Nancy told us about? Their main reason is they want to help people. And this is also true of people who do volunteer work. There are a lot of studies showing that people who do volunteer work are happier. When I'm messed up, helping somebody else really helps me. It reminds me of Mark Thomas saying that the best reason that you should forgive somebody is to keep yourself from suffering from the hate inside yourself, or words to that effect. My threefold path that I got from my spirit guides is be peaceful, radiate love, count your blessings. And I try to remember radiate love when I'm around other people, both nice people and difficult people. I remember I used to have a lot of problems with students I didn't like because they weren't good students, and I got away from that by just imagining that I'm radiating love and everything is nice. Now, of course, that doesn't have the action part of compassion in it, but it really helps. I don't always remember to do that, but when I do remember, it makes me feel better. It takes away that negativity and judgment. Do all religious or spiritual traditions have the same concept of compassion? I've been doing some reading on this lately, and I was surprised. I guess I should have known this. Western religions tend to focus on compassion for specific individuals or groups. Buddhism runs to seeing all sentient beings as one and relieving suffering for all. This is why some Buddhists, but not all Buddhists, are vegetarians. It was my original reason for becoming a vegetarian in 1975. I didn't want to kill animals. It made me feel terrible about that. Since then, I've learned that vegetarianism can involve compassion not only for other animals, but also help my own health and the health of the planet. So it's kind of useless to proselytize it, just make people mad when you tell them they shouldn't eat meat. But it is scientifically established if you eat less meat, if you cut down, if you have very little meat compared to a lot of meat, you'll be a lot healthier. So that's less of an argument, and people can see that, I think. Taoists, beginning with their legendary founder Lao Tzu, are often vegetarian. In fact, very few people in Hong Kong are actually practicing Taoists, but somebody said to me one day, let's go to a Taoist meeting. And we walked in and we just lucked out. It was Lao Tzu's birthday, for Pete's sake. And people were real impressed with me because I was a vegetarian. And they were also doing mediumship, by the way. They do. You can ask questions about general things or about your health, and you burn a little piece of paper, and the medium gives you a response. That's my favorite philosophy, and it is connected to spiritualism. In 2015, I think it was, I attended a conference in Derby, England, on spirituality and well-being with an organization called Compassionate Well-Being. I didn't really know what that meant at the time, compassionate well-being, but I gave a presentation on how Chinese magic and religious philosophy is geared toward medical and financial well-being. The conference was organized by my friend Hannah Gilbert, who is one of the founders of Exploring the Extraordinary, a group that studies the paranormal that I belong to. It's mostly people from England. Hannah Gilbert and her father, Paul Gilbert, who's a professor at the University of Derby. And Paul Gilbert has an OBE, which is an honor from the British Crown, for his work on compassion in clinical psychology with the National Health Service. And he's also the author of Compassionate Mind, the book Compassionate Mind. He says that religious ethics tend to emphasize compassion for others, which is great. But the problem is the religious organizations often spoil that with their tribal conflict and authoritarianism. He talks about how to be compassionate. If you're going to help others, you have to know the tools. If you're going to do some action. So if you're a firefighter, you have to know about the equipment and then how to use it in order to actually be compassionate. And it's often difficult to be compassionate or to get people to even be compassionate with themselves. He does cognitive behavioral therapy, and when he asks people to be compassionate with themselves about some traumatic event they had in the past, I said, think about it now. And usually they describe it in terrible terms, and he says, okay, now let's do this again and talk about it in a compassionate way and be kind with yourself about the experience that you went through. And people will say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to think about that. Don't make me think about those terrible things. So it's really difficult to figure out how to get people to be compassionate to themselves. I still don't know much about his compassion-focused therapy, CFT, and his compassionate mind training, CMT, but I can see there's a lot to it. So I learned quite a bit when I just started looking into what he's doing. I understand a little bit better now what they mean by compassionate well-being. Okay, here are a few takeaways from my point of view. You don't have to agree with this, but this is what I take from it. Number one, compassion turns out to be good for everybody. It's good for individuals, groups, and societies. It has survival value. All we need is love. Bum, ba, 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 bum. But there are things that mess that up, as I'm sure you're well aware. Organized hostility and divisiveness that is dysfunctional for everybody. Second takeaway for me, compassion is built into humans and other animals genetically, but to be really good at it takes effort and expertise, like compassionate mind training. Third point, therefore, let us be compassionate and grateful for everybody, including ourselves, but especially for people who specialize in compassion, like first responders, Nancy Lombardo, and people who train others to be compassionate, Paul Gilbert, Mark Thomas, and maybe almost everybody, if not everybody, in this room. Thank you.
Thank you.